Morning. A lot of talk about cool factor, so I feel really obligated to let you know here at the outset, this skinny tie is literally the coolest thing about me. All 14,000 people in that last video, cooler than me. Nonetheless, my name is Jake Soberal. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Bitwise Industries. And if that is not impressive enough, I do want to share my favorite accolade so far from 2020. It came from a column in the Bakersfield Californian, written by Robert Price, March 1st, in which it was proclaimed publicly that I am Richard Chapman's new best friend. We are delighted to be here, and my hope this morning is to share a bit more about Bitwise and why we think that Kern County and Bakersfield are so important in the work that we're doing and just more broadly as an important city in the United States. I'd like to do that through two stories that I think contextualize what we do at Bitwise really, really well. The first is the life story that belongs to Irma Olguin, the co-founder of Bitwise Industries. Once you meet her, I won't be invited back. Irma grew up in a town called Carruthers. Carruthers is to the south and west of Fresno. It is a farming town. When you grow up there, your reality is likely that you either work on the farm or you own the farm. Irma grew up in the former story. Her siblings, everybody that she knew grew up doing field work, and that was her vision for her life. Irma, though, lived the very, very fortunate story of, by serendipity, of course, arriving at a different reality. So Irma went to Carruthers High School one day. They announced over the loudspeaker that you could get out of class if you came to the cafeteria to take the PSAT. Irma, being brilliant, decided that she wanted to take the PSAT. And that was how the world began to learn that Irma was indeed quite brilliant. It led to college mail coming to her house. She describes it as the first glossy mail that she ever got. And that, of course, then led to Irma being offered a full ride scholarship to the University of Toledo. And when you hear Irma tell this story, for most of us, that would be the end of the story. We are now going to college. We have this wonderful opportunity. Irma's family, though, had the unenviable responsibility to look back at her and say, well, we don't have the money for the bus fare to get you there. But being scrappy, being smart, the entire gang spent the summer recycling cans and bottles that got Irma to the University of Toledo, where, of course, in an act of further serendipity, she selected her college major, computer engineering, because it was the shiniest building on campus. So to all of our great fortune, serendipity landed Irma as a software engineer. She launched off into a career bouncing around the country before deciding very intentionally that what she was experiencing was so very different from what she had expected for her life. So very different than what those in her childhood circles expected for their lives, that she had an obligation to connect others coming from similar stories to that very, very same outcome, and chose to return to Fresno. Meanwhile, growing up in a very different story on the opposite side of the tracks was me. I grew up in a town called Clovis. It is an affluent suburb to the north and east of Fresno. I'm a generation further removed from the immigrant story. My grandmother came here illegally from Mexico. My father was born here and the first in his family, either side of our family, to go to college. And he himself went on to become a computer programmer. I grew up with a privilege where it was expected that I would go to school. It was expected that I would go to college. I went to college and law school. I was the student that gave the graduation speech at Clovis High School, thinking this crowd really, really ought to enjoy this because I will never be back here again. And bounced around the country for college and my early career experience before deciding very intentionally that all of these opportunities I'd been accumulating around the country, this perspective that came from the privilege I'd been born into, the highest and best application of that was right back where I started in my hometown of Fresno, California. And so I chose to move home. So here we are, Irma returning home as a software engineer and entrepreneur, me returning home as an intellectual property attorney, and we get back and begin digging digging in, respectively, to our careers. I was just smart enough to say that there is this sort of young Latina from Carruthers who seems to be running all of the most exciting things in technology in Fresno. I don't know what she's doing. I don't know how she's doing it, but I do know that I'd very much like to ride her coattails. And so I sought out Irma and we began to work together in that context. Me as her attorney and she as the brilliant engineer that was beginning to change our community. We became fast friends, and what we got to really quickly was what we identified as this shared frustration. And that was that we were encountering in our city a view of our city that was very different than our vision for our city. And what that meant is that we saw Fresno as a place with this tremendous potential, anything being possible, and we just so happened to be engaged in this industry, the technology industry, that we were seeing create jobs and opportunity and wealth and fundamental economic lift in cities around the country, and we thought, well, why couldn't that happen here? Why couldn't we use the technology industry that was at our fingertips to create broader prosperity in our community? And so we were young and dumb enough to think, well, you know what, we could. And so we began with that vision. How do we use tech to create broader prosperity in our community? And what you see today as Bitwise Industries is the result of that question. We began to map, okay, well, what would step one be? What would step two be? How would we actually accomplish this? All through the lens of how do we take individuals coming from my story, coming from Irma's story, coming from every story in between, and connect them to broader prosperity in our city using the technology industry. We are now almost 7 years into that adventure, and I'd like to share with you. So at Bitwise Industries, we make a lot of videos. We haven't brought any here today. We say a lot of things and do a lot of things, but the thing that we are generally best at is confusing people. They are excited but confused about what this company does. And so I'd like to spend a bit of time walking through what we call the Bitwise ecosystem. It's 3 parts, and we think it's important, and we think we are tremendously excited to bring it here to Bakersfield. The first piece of that puzzle is unequivocally the most important, and we call it workforce. It is this idea of how do we ready people in our community for pursuing opportunity, for doing brilliant things in the technology industry. And our lens is very narrowly focused on how do we make that possible for people coming from a story of systemic poverty. So what I think is obvious to the public is that we teach people to code, which if you're not in the technology industry, a foreign term, we teach people how to build software for computers that make businesses work. And that isn't terribly uncommon. There are coding boot camps around the country and world, and we're using substantially the same tools on a technical side to teach them how to code. Where we are fundamentally different and where we are uniquely relevant to communities like Fresno and Bakersfield and Merced and so many of the communities here in the Central Valley is that we've said we want to make it possible for people coming from systemic poverty to enter the technology industry. And what that means is that we've got to think differently about what are these blocks to entry. Because if you've grown up in a story of poverty, the grit that you've had to bring to the table just to survive means that you're not intimidated of JavaScript. It's not the computer that scares you. It's that you don't have a ride to class. You don't have anybody to watch your kids. You don't have a way to pay for groceries with the time that you've lost, spent learning how to become a computer programmer. You don't have access to reliable health care, mental, physical, emotional. So we said, we bet that if we were able to address those needs, we would be able to connect this rich population of individuals that are trapped in systemic poverty to opportunity in the technology industry. And so we provide those supports alongside the technical education. The net effect of that is over the course of the last 7 years, we have grown in Fresno to become the largest vocational educator of computer programmers in the United States. And the net outcome of that is that from those that have come through our academy, Geekwise Academy is the brand name under which we operate, 80% of those leaving our career program have earned technical employment. Of those, greater than 50% are women. Greater than 50% are underrepresented minorities, and 20% are first-generation Americans. And perhaps most exciting of all for purposes of the conversation that we're having here in the room today, 95% of them have taken and retained employment in Fresno County. The economic impact of that is 2,000 technology jobs in Fresno in 7 years, and the halo effect of that is 10,000 new jobs in Fresno over the course of the last 10 years on the backs of technology industry's growth. How does that work? Brookings came and studied the work that we were doing several years ago and determined that for every one tech job you create in a community like Fresno, you create 4.3 other jobs in that community. Think of the sandwich shop that can hire additional staff. Think of the accountancy that can hire additional accountants, the law firm that can add additional manpower to service the need of a wealth-generating industry. That is the work that we do at Bitwise Academy. It is the first and most important piece of our ecosystem. The second piece of our ecosystem is this idea of industry. If you've grown up in Kern County, regardless of your story, you know what it's like to be an underdog. You go out into the world and you share where your hometown is, and we do so too often with some level of timidity. I'm from Central California. Or more, you're on the East Coast and you share that you're from California and you know that they assume you're at the beach. And so what we have said is not only are we talking about geographies where the starting gate is that of being an underdog, but we're talking about populations that we're training at Bitwise Academy that have additional factors sort of leaving them as an underdog as they look to enter industry. And we believed, on the other hand, that the work that we were doing at Bitwise Academy, it wasn't benevolent, it wasn't charity. We were unlocking rich and deep talent for the technology industry that the world had overlooked. And so we thought we could do two really important things. We thought that we could use that talent to build an extraordinary company. And so we built a company called Shift3 Technologies. Shift3 is a software consulting firm that does enterprise software consulting around the country and world. The reason that you ought to care a great deal about that is that substantially all of the engineering talent at Shift3 Technologies has been hired directly out of Bitwise Academy. And so the missional thing that we are doing is that we are taking that talent and we're saying, world, you're going to underestimate and overlook this talent based on its geography, based on its race, on its gender, on its ethnicity. We are not, and we believe so deeply in this talent that we're going to show you how to build a great company of non-traditional talent. Now keep in mind, Shift3 Technologies hires fewer than 5% of the graduates at Bitwise Academy, so we're not driving the placement of our graduates. Rather, we are agitating the market, saying that it is possible to do extraordinary things if you think differently about where and who you're hiring. So we call that piece of our business more broadly industry. The last piece of the ecosystem is the most obvious. It tends to be where folks get most excited, and it's a lot of fun, and we call it infrastructure. And as we think about doing these things, we think about the envelope. Where does all of this happen? How do we wrap this experience in technology? What we want to avoid is this cliff. You've come, you've learned how to code, now go out into the world without any direction of where you're going to land next. And so what we have done is we have begun in our hometown of Fresno, buying up blighted real estate assets at the center of our city. We develop them and then we lease them out to ourselves and others within the technology industry. That work started in 5,000 square feet at the north end of downtown Fresno. One of our early investors, we were looking around for a building. The only trouble with that search is we had no money. And so we were looking around for a building, and one of our early investors says to us, hey, you know what, I've owned a building for 40 years at the north end of downtown Fresno. Would you like to come and tour it? At this point, we would have toured anybody's garage. And so I say, sure, John, I'd love to come by. And John, who is not a salesperson, but is incredibly wise, he had decided that day that he was going to do his very best sales pitch. And so John is walking me around this 5,000 square foot building at the north end of downtown Fresno, and he's showing me we could put this here, we could convert this room over here to this thing. We get to the end of the tour, and he says, you know, so Jake, what'd you think of the building? And I said, John, it's quite nice that you would take the time to show me around. I'm just not sure, you know, I can't imagine a story of a software developer walking through those doors and volunteering to stay. And he said, no pressure, Jake. There is no pressure at all. Just wanted you to be aware of the options. And I just, you know, since we could give you this building for free, I wanted you to know about it. I said, John, this is the building. and that is where we began, and maybe how we learned to think differently about these long vacant assets at the center of our city. And that has grown to an envelope of 250,000 square feet in downtown Fresno that's home today to 200 technology companies and a vibrance that for us was largely absent at our city center. And so not only are we fueling economic growth, but we're tying it to place at the center of our city. And deeply important to this is that when we take that student, most of our students come to us from field, factory, restaurant, retail work. When we take that student and we invite them to a GeekWise class and they walk through the doors of a building, they're not walking into doors where immediately the environment signals, this is not for you. They're walking through doors where immediately the environment is inviting and signals that it is designed specifically for them. And these businesses behind these doors are here because they want access to you. They are supportive of you. They are your champions. And ultimately, that has been the differentiating factor in the real estate that we have built in downtown Fresno. All of that work, we think, forms up an ecosystem. And if I stopped the story there, Richard never would have invited me or become my best friend. We have, for most of our history, had folks reach out and say, the work that you're doing is really exciting. We would like you to think about doing it in our town. And our response, you could find videos of Irma or I speaking on the internet. Our response was usually sort of a pithy, but the problem is that we don't care about your town. And I know it sounds a little bit blunt, but the truth is that when I say that, we're talking about a care that it comes from it being your hometown. That we can't fake. And it wasn't that we don't want best things for your town. It was that wasn't the driving motivation in why we started this business. And nonetheless, people would come and they would visit, and they were quite nice. Some number of years ago, a group, I think led by Mayor Go, and I think Richard was involved, I think J.P. Lake was involved, Austin and Anna Smith, reached out and said, hey, we'd love to come visit. And so we're thinking, a couple of visitors, we spend a little bit of time, and, we say no, and then we send them home. We get ready for this day, and of course we ready to greet them, and down the street come not one, but 2 charter buses full of people from Bakersfield. Assuming that we would be providing lunch, I sort of turned to Irma, I think we're going to need more lunch. That was the beginning of us getting to know Bakersfield. And in that process, what changed is not that care I described, we've all of a sudden managed to contrive for Bakersfield. That's something that's earned in years and decades, not days and months. What we found on that bus, though, were people that cared about this place the way we cared about Fresno. And immediately, sort of that gave way to us a desire to help. And we didn't know how. We didn't have a model for expansion. We had our plan was to have enough money in the bank to open tomorrow. So we began to think, well, what would it look like to take the work that we're doing here and be successful in another city, to contribute to their story. And I think a lot of times that gets confused, and we're quite pleased, right, with the stories that have been written about us in Bakersfield. But I thought it might be helpful to sort of contextualize the work that we plan to do here. And immediately came to mind a story from my childhood. You may have an analogous one in yours. It was something preteen. My dad said, "Hey, Saturday we've got some work to do in the backyard. We've got to dig this ditch." I'm thinking this is going to be really exciting to see Dad dig that ditch. So Saturday morning comes along. He grabs his shovel. He grabs his lawn chair. Grabs an ice chest full of Arizona iced tea, and we're going back to the location of said future ditch. I'm thinking, okay, great. Dad sets up lawn chair, cracks open Arizona iced tea, sits down, hands me shovel, and he says, "Son, you're digging a ditch." And I spent that day digging the ditch. Now, we're not going to be quite that way here, but when we talk about coming to Bakersfield, this isn't a passive activity for you all. We are only able to have the sort of impact that I described having in Fresno here in Bakersfield if we lock arms and do it together. We need your help. We need your love of this city. We need your knowledge of this city in direct capacities. We need you to send students to Geekwise Academy, yes. We need you to buy your software locally from Shift 3 Technologies, yes. Oh, by the way, that software pays property taxes on 18th Street and doesn't go to San Francisco. We can talk more about that later. We need you also, if you're a technology company, to choose to come and be near us. Maybe not in our building, but be downtown and be supportive of what's going on in growing events in the technology industry. We need all of that, but we need you in whatever way you're working in this community to be working with us towards a more hopeful future in Bakersfield and Kern County. And an expression of that in our work is that we're not going to be managing this from Fresno. We're not going to be exporting folks from Fresno to come and run this. And so this morning I am really excited to introduce to you the first member of our full-time team here in Bakersfield, Amy Thielen, the Vice President of Bitwise Bakersfield. Amy joins our team and will be running our operations here in Bakersfield. She is a wonderful example of what we think is so wonderful about this city and the sort of team that we hope to build out in this place. I am really thrilled to have had the opportunity to share with you all here this morning, and I hope that there are other opportunities as we dig in here in Bakersfield. But I want to leave you with this. I talked about some direct ways to be involved in what we're doing, but my hope is that everybody leaves this room, even if you say, I can't do any of those things. I'm completely disconnected from the world that you've described. Best of luck downtown, sort of we'll read about it in the newspaper. I've got sort of 3 challenges that I'd like you to take home this morning as ways that you can be a part of what is so important and exciting about the work that we plan to do here. The first, and this is a characteristic of Bitwise, is that I invite you to be radically welcoming, radically inclusive in this community. So much of what we do at Bitwise is about taking somebody who is different, who has not found their place, and reminding them that we're building environments in which you should feel safe, you should feel seen, you should feel important, you should feel welcome. And what's at the bottom of that is that we are viciously fighting to get to the brilliance that person adds to the story that is unfolding. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the moment you all are in here in Kern County and Bakersfield, where people are throwing EDM festivals, building world-class hotels, and making Bakersfield into a technology center, is an exciting moment. It's a moment where something starts to happen. People start to feel a little bit more confident sharing their idea. Let's be really, really honest. Some of those ideas are good. Not all of them. Some of those ideas are really bad. But what we're inclined to do as a community, and this isn't a Fresno Bakersfield thing, this is a world thing, is to run into that stuff and be skeptics. There couldn't be anything less helpful to the outcomes we all want to see in Kern County. I'd invite you all to default to supporting every idea you hear. How do we make that possible? How do we support that person getting to the next stage in whatever is on their heart, whatever they want to add to the mix? And the last piece of the puzzle is the easiest. We're working in descending order. Everybody can do this one. We in Fresno, and this may be true of Bakersfield as well, are our own worst enemies. We talk about our city because it is hot. We talk about our city as having bad air quality. We talk about we say terrible things about our hometown. And so a challenge we levy often in Fresno is this, is you have heard so many wonderful things this morning, whether it's from one of the credible speakers before or after me, or me. I'd invite you, whether it's in the park, at your dinner table, in church, wherever, the next conversation you have, talk about something exciting and inspiring that is happening in Bakersfield, because that is the simple beginning of so many wonderful things. Thank you.